Last spring, I moved 6 perennials out of my garden beds and into pots on the back patio. Not because I was running out of space, because 3 of them actually perform better in containers than they ever did in the ground. One of them, and I would not have believed this 5 years ago, produced twice as many blooms in a 14-inch pot as it did in my best garden bed. Twice. I counted the flower stems. I compared them side by side. The potted plant won, and it was not close. I will get to that one later. But the reason I am making this video is that I keep hearing the same thing from people who watch this channel. I do not have a garden bed. I live in an apartment. I only have a patio. I rent, and I cannot dig up the yard. And every time I hear that, my answer is the same. You do not need a garden bed. You need 12 pots and the right 12 plants. These are the 12 perennials that grow better in pots than they do in the ground. And the one that shocked me, number 8, is a plant whose biggest flaw in the ground becomes its greatest strength in a container. Its worst habit turns into its best trick when you take away the open soil. I will explain exactly what I mean when we get there. I have been growing perennials in containers for about 8 years now. The first 3 of those years, I treated pots like consolation prizes, places where I stuck whatever did not fit in the border. Then I started noticing something I could not explain. Certain plants were outperforming their siblings in the ground. More flowers, tighter growth, better color, not just surviving, winning. A friend of mine noticed the same thing with her patio containers, and we started comparing notes. She had a lavender in a 12-inch pot that had lived 4 winters on her back deck, while the one in her garden bed rotted every single year. That is when I stopped thinking of pots as the backup plan and started treating them as the actual garden. By the time we finish today, you will know exactly which 12 perennials belong in containers, which months each one blooms, and how to combine just 5 of them into a display that carries color from April through November. If you find this useful, I would appreciate it if you passed it along to someone who thinks they need a yard to grow a garden. They do not. Now, I want to address something before we get into the plants. Most of the advice you hear about container gardening focuses on annuals, petunias, geraniums, impatiens. You buy them in May. They look gorgeous through July. They fade in August. They die in October. And next spring, you spend the same $40 or $50 all over again. I did this myself for years. Every spring, I would fill my patio pots with annuals, enjoy them for a few months, dump them in the compost bin in November, and start the whole cycle over in April. I thought that was just what you did with patio pots. That was the deal. Seasonal color, seasonal expense, seasonal disappointment. Nobody told me there was an alternative. Nobody at the garden centre said, you could put a perennial in that pot instead, and it would come back next year, and the year after, and the year after that. They were not hiding information from me. They were selling me what guaranteed I would come back every spring. Once you understand that a single perennial in a pot can bloom for years without replanting, the annual cycle starts to look like exactly what it is. A subscription. Every flat of petunias is a subscription. Every perennial is a one-time investment. And here is the thing most people miss about container perennials specifically. The pot does not just keep the plant alive. For certain species, the pot actually solves a problem the ground creates. Drainage problems, spreading problems, root competition problems. The container removes the obstacle, and the plant responds by performing better than it ever could in open soil. That idea, that the pot is the solution and not the limitation, is the thread running through every single plant on this list. And the perennial I mentioned in the opening, the one that doubled its blooms in a pot, is coming up shortly. I still do not fully understand why it works as well as it does. But first, let me start at the beginning of the season and work forward. Coneflower. Echinacea. This is the most reliable container perennial I have ever grown. 2 to 3 feet tall, pink and purple daisy-shaped flowers that butterflies absolutely cover from June through September. The blooms open flat and wide with a raised copper-orange cone in the center that darkens as the flower ages. Plant it in a 14-inch pot minimum with drainage holes. Full sun. Zones 3 through 9. The reason coneflower works so well in containers is that it has a compact root system that does not resent confinement. In the ground, it spreads outward, sending energy into lateral root growth and new shoots that thin out the bloom display. In a pot, it concentrates all of that energy upward into blooms. I have had the same coneflower in a glazed ceramic pot on my front steps for 4 years. It comes back every spring without me doing anything except topping off the soil in March. 4 years. One plant. One pot. Still going. Coral bells. Heuchera. This is the container plant that earns its space even when it is not blooming. The foliage comes in burgundy, lime green, peach, silver, and nearly black depending on the variety. Some varieties have leaves that look like they were dipped in metallic paint. Grows 8 to 12 inches tall. The leaves are the show, and they look stunning from April through November. Small bell-shaped flowers on thin stems appear May through July, but honestly, the foliage is the reason you grow it. Part shade to full shade, zones 4 through 9. This is the perennial for the north-facing patio, the shaded apartment balcony, the covered porch that gets 2 hours of morning sun. It thrives where everything else sulks. A neighbor of mine has 3 coral bells in matching dark pots on her covered front porch. One in deep burgundy, one in chartreuse, one in silver. Please assume those are some kind of expensive seasonal arrangement. They are 3 plants she bought 5 years ago for about $6 each. They have never been replaced. They have never even been repotted. They just keep getting fuller and more dramatic every year. Dianthus, also called pinks. Fragrant, compact, and built for pots. 8 to 12 inches tall. Clusters of pink, red, or white flowers with fringed petals and a clove-like scent that fills a patio on warm evenings. Blooms April through June, then sporadically again in fall if you deadhead. Full sun, zones 3 through 9. Dianthus naturally forms a tight mound that fits perfectly in a 10 to 12-inch pot. The foliage is blue-green and stays neat all season, even between bloom cycles. A friend of mine grows 6 dianthus in matching terracotta pots along her front steps. She bought them 4 years ago for about $5 each. They come back every spring looking better than the last. $30. 4 years of curb appeal. No replanting. That is about $7 a year for a front entrance display that gets compliments from the mail carrier. Now, the one I mentioned in the opening, Daylily, specifically the variety called Stella de Oro. Golden, yellow trumpet-shaped flowers, 18 inches tall, blooms May through September. 5 months of color from one plant in one pot. This is the variety that changed how I think about container perennials entirely. Most daylilies bloom for 3 weeks and stop. Stella de Oro is a compact rebloomer that produces waves of flowers all summer long. One flush finishes, you snap off the spent stems, and within 2 weeks the next round is opening. Full sun, zones 3 through 9. 12-inch pot minimum. I moved a Stella de Oro from my border into a 16-inch pot 3 years ago as an experiment. It produced more flowers in the pot than it did in the ground. I counted. More. I went back and forth between the 2 plants multiple times that summer, just to make sure I was not imagining it. The containerized root restriction seems to push it into heavier bloom production. When the roots hit the wall of the pot, the plant shifts its energy from spreading into flowering. The pot does not limit this plant. The pot makes it work harder, and that is the shift I want you to hold on to as we keep going. These are not perennials that merely survive in pots. Some of them are genuinely better in pots, The container changes the equation, and the next one proves it even more dramatically. Lavender. Purple spikes, 12 to 18 inches tall, silvery green aromatic foliage, blooms June through August. Bees swarm it. The dried flowers scent your house all winter. It earns triple duty as a flower, a fragrance plant, and a culinary herb. Full sun, zones 5 through 9. Here is why lavender is actually better in pots than in the ground. Lavender hates wet feet. It rots in heavy clay soil. It dies in soggy winters. It sits in waterlogged ground for 2 weeks in March, and by the time you check on it in April, the crown has turned to mush. A pot with drainage holes and gritty potting mix gives it the perfect sharp drainage it demands. I have killed lavender in the ground 3 times. 3 separate plants, 3 different beds, 3 different years. Dead every time. In a pot on my south-facing patio, the same plant has survived 4 winters. The pot solves the drainage problem the ground creates. The container is not a compromise for this plant. It is the rescue. I want to pause here for a moment. If you planted just these first 5, Eve, you would have bloom from April through September. 5 pots, 6 months of continuous colour on your patio. And we are not even halfway through the list. You are already past the point where most annual container displays start fading. The petunias are getting leggy, the impatiens are thinning out, and your perennial pots are just hitting their stride. Everything from here forward extends that season deeper into fall and adds layers of texture, fragrance, and design that make the whole display look like you planned it. Because you did. Sedum, the variety called Autumn Joy, the indestructible pot perennial, 18 to 24 inches tall, thick succulent leaves that look architectural all summer, almost like a jade plant that decided to grow outdoors. Broccoli-shaped buds form in late July. Pink flower heads open in August, deepen to rose in September, turn rust red by November. The flower heads hold their shape through winter and look beautiful covered in frost. You get 4-season interest from one plant in one pot. Full sun, zones 3 through 9. Sedum survives drought, neglect, forgotten watering, brutal cold, and the kind of treatment that kills everything else. I have a sedum in a wide, shallow pot on my deck that I genuinely forgot about for an entire month last July. I went on vacation. I came back. It was blooming, perfectly happy, not a single wilted leaf. If you travel, if you forget to water, if you want a container perennial that simply refuses to die, this is it. Permission to be imperfect. Sedum does not care. Catmint, the variety called Walker's Low. Lavender blue, flower spikes on silvery green foliage that has a soft, almost hazy quality from a few feet away. 18 to 24 inches tall. Blooms May through September. Cut it back by half in mid-summer, and it produces an entirely new flush of flowers within 3 weeks. 5 months of bloom from one plant. Full sun, zones 3 through 8. Catmint spills beautifully over pot edges, creating a soft cascading effect that makes even a simple terracotta pot look like a cottage garden container. It is drought-tolerant once established, deer-resistant, and pollinators treat it like a restaurant. In a 14-inch pot with one coneflower behind it, you have a 2-plant container combination that blooms together from June through September. That pairing is my single favorite container recipe. The purple blue of the catmint against the pink coneflower petals with that copper cone in the center. It looks like you studied color theory. You did not. You just put 2 plants in one pot. Number 8 is the one in the title. The perennial, whose biggest flaw in the ground becomes its greatest strength in a pot. I would not have believed it 5 years ago. Japanese anemone, 3 feet tall. Elegant pink or white flowers on long, thin stems that sway in the slightest breeze like they are dancing. Blooms September through October, exactly when every other container plant is finishing for the year. Part shade to full sun, zones 4 through 8. Most people think of Japanese anemone as a garden bed plant only, because it spreads aggressively by underground runners in open soil. Gardeners warn each other about it. Plant it once, and you will spend the next 5 years pulling it out of places you never wanted it. In a pot, those runners have nowhere to go. They hit the wall and stop. The plant stays contained, compact, and produces more flowers per square inch than it does in open soil. The pot turns its biggest weakness, that aggressive spreading, into its biggest advantage. It stays put and blooms its heart out. But here is what I really want you to understand about this plant, because it presents something bigger than one perennial in one pot. The container does not just solve a drainage problem or a size problem. It edits the plant's behavior. It takes a perennial that wants to colonize your entire garden bed and turns it into a focused, contained bloom machine. Every bit of energy that would have gone into sending runners 3 feet in every direction goes into flowers instead. This is the perennial that carries your patio display through October when everything else has stopped. I was genuinely shocked the first time I saw it perform in a pot. I had avoided growing it for years because I did not want it spreading through my beds. One pot solved the only problem I had with it. And once I saw that, I started looking at every aggressive spreader differently. Not as a problem plant, as a pot candidate. Now we shift from what blooms to what makes everything else look intentional. This is where your patio stops being a collection of pots and starts looking like a designed garden. Hosta, the queen of shade containers, 12 to 36 inches tall, depending on variety. Massive sculptural leaves in green, blue, gold, or variegated patterns. Some varieties have leaves the size of dinner plates with deep, ribbed veins that catch rainwater and hold it in little pools. Grows in full shade to part shade, the plant for the covered porch, the north-facing balcony, the patio under the big tree. Zones 3 through 9. Hostas in pots are actually easier to protect from slugs, the number one hosta enemy in the ground, because you can elevate the pot on feet, use copper tape around the rim, and control the surrounding environment completely. No mulch for slugs to hide in, no damp soil for them to breed in. The pot becomes a fortress. Blue varieties like Halcyon and Elegans in matching glazed pots create a display that looks like a magazine cover. A neighbor of mine has 5 hostas in blue ceramic pots along her shaded front walkway. Each one a slightly different variety, different leaf shape, different shade of blue-green. People assume she hired a designer. She spent about $60 total. The hosta is not about bloom. It is about making everything around it look intentional. It is the visual anchor that tells that this patio was designed, not just filled. Ornamental grass, specifically blue fescue, 8 to 12 inches tall. Steel blue foliage in a perfect dome shape that looks like it was trimmed by hand, but grows that way naturally. No flowers worth mentioning. You grow it for the texture and color contrast. Full sun, zones 4 through 8. Blue fescue in a small pot placed between flowering containers is the design element that makes a patio display look professional instead of random. It breaks up the color, adds texture, and gives the eye a resting point between blooms. I use it between every third flowering pot on my front steps. Without it, the display looks like a flower shop. With it, the display looks like a garden. That single difference, the pause between blooms, is what separates a collection of pots from a designed container garden. Interior designers talk about negative space. This is negative space for your patio. The empty beat that makes the music make sense. Now we move from what you see to what you taste and touch and share. These last two change what the patio means. Chives. The edible perennial that belongs in a pot on every patio. Purple pom-pom flowers in May and June that are genuinely beautiful enough to hold their own next to any ornamental on this list. Edible greens you can cut all season and they regrow within a week. 12 to 15 inches tall. Full sun, zones 3 through 9. Chives never die. I have divided the same chive plant 4 times in 6 years. Each division goes into a new pot. Each pot produces flowers and greens indefinitely. One $4 chive plant from the nursery has produced about $20 worth of fresh chives per year for 6 years. That is a plant that has paid for itself many times over, and it is still going. In a pot by your kitchen door, you will use it every single day you cook. Step outside, snip what you need, step back in. The purple flowers next to a pot of golden Stella de Oro daylilies is a color combination I stumbled into by accident. Purple globes against golden trumpets. It is now one I would never undo. Ever-bearing strawberries. White flowers, then red fruit, May through October. 6 to 8 inches tall, trailing habit that cascades over pot edges beautifully. Full sun, zones 4 through 9. Grow them in a wide, shallow pot or a hanging basket. The combination of flowers, fruit, and trailing foliage makes strawberries one of the most visually dynamic container plants you can grow. And you eat the output. Every grandchild who visits my patio goes straight to the strawberry pot. Does not matter what else is blooming. Does not matter how spectacular the Japanese anemone looks or how full the coneflower display is. They walk past all of it. They go to the strawberries. It is the most popular plant in my entire garden, and it sits in a $12 hanging basket from the hardware store. The patio stops being a display at this point. It becomes a place where someone small reaches up into a hanging basket and picks a warm strawberry and eats it standing there. That is not gardening advice. That is just what happens when you put the right plants in pots and let people near them. Now that you know the 12, I need to tell you the 3 things that kill perennials in pots that do not kill them in the ground. Because the container solves some problems, but it creates 3 new ones, and if you do not address them, you will lose plants you did not need to lose. First, winter root freeze. In the ground, roots are insulated by the mass of surrounding soil. Feet and feet of earth in every direction holding warmth. In a pot, the root ball is surrounded by air on all sides. A hard freeze can kill roots right through the pot wall in a single night. The fix is straightforward. Use pots at least 14 inches wide because more soil mass means more insulation. Use ceramic or thick plastic because thin metal conducts cold directly to the roots. And in zones 5 and colder, group your pots together against a south-facing wall for winter or wrap them in burlap. The grouped pots insulate each other. The south-facing wall radiates stored heat. I lost 2 perennials my first winter before I learned this. I have not lost one since. Second, drainage. More container perennials die from sitting in water than from any other cause. Every pot needs drainage holes, no exceptions. Every pot needs potting mix, not garden soil. Garden soil compacts in containers and suffocates roots. It turns into a dense brick by August that repels water instead of absorbing it. This is non-negotiable. If the pot does not have a hole in the bottom, it is a decoration, not a planter. Drill one, or buy a different pot. Third, pot size. The number 1 mistake is pots that are too small. The root system needs room to establish and room to insulate itself through winter. 12 inches minimum for small perennials like Dianthus and blue fescue, 14 to 16 for medium ones like Coneflower and Catmint, 18 or more for anything over 2 feet tall like Japanese Anemone and Hosta. Bigger pot means more soil, more moisture buffer, more insulation, and a happier plant over a longer life. Do not try to save $3 by going one size smaller. The pot is the garden bed. Give it the space you would give the ground. Now that you know what keeps awesome shape, I want to show you the 5-pot combination that gives you bloom from April through November. Total cost, about $40 to $50 in plants, plus whatever you spend on pots. If you only buy 5 pots this weekend, here is the combination for a sunny patio. Pot 1, Dianthus, April through June. Pot 2, Coneflower, June through September. Pot 3, Lavender, June through August. Pot 4, Sedum, August through November. Pot 5, Japanese Anemone, September through October. Those 5 plants hand off colour to each other across 8 months. Dianthus opens the season in April with those fragrant pink clusters. By the time it finishes in June, coneflower and lavender are already blooming. When lavender wraps up in August, sedum is just getting started with those pink heads that deepen through fall. And when the coneflower fades in September, Japanese anemone picks up and carries you through October with those elegant swaying flowers, while sedum holds that rust-red colour deep into November. 8 months of continuous bloom, 5 pots, 5 plants, no gaps, no dead weeks. Every month is covered by at least one plant handing off to the next. That is the cost of one season of annual hanging baskets, except these come back next year, and the year after that. The patio is not the limitation, it is the garden. 5 pots prove it. I started this video by telling you I moved 6 perennials out of my garden beds and into pots on the back patio. Now you understand why. The coneflower concentrated its energy into more blooms because the pot stopped it from spreading sideways. The lavender finally stopped dying because the pot gave it the drainage the ground never could. The Japanese anemones stopped trying to take over the neighborhood and channeled everything into flowers because the pot edited its behavior. The Lavender and Daylily doubled its bloom count in a 16-inch pot, and I still shake my head when I look at it every summer. The pot did not limit a single one of those plants. It solved the specific problem that was holding each one back. Drainage, spreading, root competition, soggy soil. The container is not a compromise. For these 12 perennials, it is an upgrade. And your patio, your balcony, your front steps, those are not limitations either. They are the garden. They have been the garden this whole time. You just needed the right plants to prove it. Go to the nursery this weekend. Buy 1 pot and 1 perennial from this list. Just 1. Set it on your patio, your front steps, your balcony railing. Water it when the top inch of soil feels dry. That is it. It will bloom this summer, survive this winter, and come back next spring without you lifting a finger. You do not need a garden bed. You do not need a yard. You need 1 pot and 1 plant that knows how to come back. Start there. The patio fills itself in from that first pot. Which of these 12 are you putting in a pot first? And if you already grow perennials in containers, which one has survived the longest? Drop both answers below. Those conversations are always the ones I learn the most from. I will see you next week. There is more I want to show you.